Special thanks to my Patreon patrons, Noble Tier and Larking Tier. Hey guys, it's Michael and I'm back for another reaction. Today we're back with some more Wendigoon. We're pretty much halfway through this. Well, we're close. We're about almost halfway. After this video, we should be about exactly halfway through the entire thing. Because we'll be at about 5 hours, so we'll be a little over. But yeah, let's get right into it. I don't have much to say. I can't really say much because we've gotten to a point to where I don't know any of the stuff on here. Even looking through this list, I don't see anything, like, I don't see anything that I recognize at all. Moon's built by, what the heck? Well, either way. Let's get right into it. We'll probably just do this one part, which is, it's about 30-ish minutes, so yeah, let's get into it.
Described as the interdimensional monk, and the description reads, the interdimensional monk sees the whole picture and is able to discern reality from unreality. Because of their nature, the mixture of entries around this tier is a really varied one and very difficult to comprehend. Aztec theogony refers to the theological legend of the Aztec people. This is going to come up a few times in this tier, but I'm about to condense hundreds of years of religion and culture into like 1 or 2 minutes. So if I skip over stuff or am not describing it all the way, it's really hard to, so bear with me. This can differ heavily from province to province, especially because in Aztec culture things weren't recorded or passed around that much, but the basics of their theological history go like this. A primary god and goddess lived in heaven, to which the goddess cast down a knife that cut open the earth. When the knife was cast down, 1,600 fallen gods came to earth and essentially became evil spirits. During this time, they called down a great flood which wiped out the life that was on earth before them, and after these fallen gods were not allowed back into heaven, someone named Axolotl went to Hades to try to retrieve a bone that could be brought out of Hades and used to grant the fallen gods power. But while retrieving the bone, he dropped it. The bone shattered into an inconceivable amount of pieces, and those pieces later grew into what is now humans. These humans began to serve different fallen gods, which is the reason that the cultures and tribes were so diverse and spread out, because each one was a different group of people who followed a different fallen god. At this time, the whole world was covered in darkness. So to stop it, one of the gods built a bonfire, said he needed a sacrifice to walk into the fire, to which one of the humans did, and that human was transformed into the sun. Again, that was a super short, condensed version of
such an interesting thing.
Theology, so nah. So how does this relate to all of our conspiracy theories? Well, if you'll notice some of the points in it, there's a lot of through lines that connect this with the beliefs in different religions. Think about it this way. Aztec is about as far as you can get geographically and culturally from the ancient Hebrews or Babylonians or Sumerians or something like that. Yet we still see the themes of fallen gods or angels coming from the heavens, a great flood wiping out the population on Earth, one of these fallen gods or angels going to hell, humanity following these different lesser gods, and then finally one of these followers of the gods being sacrificed for the greater good and then ascending to the heavens. This is actually a common thread seen in a lot of old religions and traditions, and it's interesting to draw the parallels between them to try to figure out where the roots of not only humanity, but maybe belief in existence itself come from. The parrot is on here, I believe, as a cautionary tale. See, the parrot is a sort of hazing thing when it comes to research communities and researchers. The idea being that anytime a new journalist or researcher or scientist or whatever gets into a field that they have to do case studies, there will be a story comes up that's called the parrot story. Think about it. How many times have you seen a story where it's like a parrot stopped home invaders from breaking into a house because it started making noises that sounded like the police? Or a man caught his wife cheating because the parrot started mimicking the guy that she was cheating with, and so on and so forth. These are all either very mundane stories or stories that just didn't happen and are kind of made to fill up dead space. However, they're also viewed as a sort of rite of passage for new people getting into a research field. Something we're going to see a lot with this iceberg moving forward, especially because a lot of the concepts we're getting to are a lot. There will be more and more things similar to this parrot story. I'll point them out as we get along when I know something is disinfo, but this is a specific example of what disinfo might be. Real dowsing and Rob Domancy is in reference to dowsing, which I mentioned all the way in, I think, tier 2. If you'll remember, Dowsing is the trick in which you can hold metal bars or crossed wires and use that to figure out where water wells or spiritual areas are
or
around
oil.
the earth. Robdomancy is very similar. In the most simple version, people in ye olden days would take a stick, place it upright, let it fall, and whichever direction it fell, that would be the one they were to travel in. This was also used to make decisions. In other words, you could say fall right for yes, left for no. And it's even cited in things like the Bible as Nebuchadnezzar using Robdomancy as a way to make his decisions. What's interesting is, especially in biblical text and text at the same time, there's mention of Robdomancy and things similar to dowsing as a form of divination, which is essentially witchcraft. Historically, people who have done either as a means of determining where to put in a water vein or traveling in whatever direction, have used witchcraft or black magic familiar spirits as a means of utilizing this technique. Not only that, but there's a case to be made in historical records for people who did dowsing professionally or for others always becoming ill and with some sickness, implying that maybe something they were working with in order to do the dowsing proved to be harmful, or if this really is a black magic, maybe they're just suffering the long-term effects of it. Faust nonfiction is in reference to the very famous play Faust. The original inspiration for the story Faust came from a man named Johann Faust. He was an alchemist and a necromancer, which, if you've been watching the Iceberg to this point, you know are risky business. And according to the belief of many at the time, he himself made a deal with the devil in order to obtain the abilities of alchemy and necromancy. This inspired the Marlowe play known as The Tragical History of the Life and Death of Dr. Faustus. Here's what's interesting. At the exact same time in Poland, a story known as The Legend of Pan Twardowski was picking up a lot of steam because there was legends in that region of people making deals with the devils and then being taken to hell for it. Now, the story didn't get as famous as it is today until a man named Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, made the poem Faust that was later adapted into the Great Play. However, all of these corresponding legends came together and was about the same story of a man who met the devil at a crossroads and gave his soul to the devil so he could take instant gratification over long-term gratification. This story inspired works like Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. However, when you look into some of the more supernatural tales of it, like Tommy Johnson and Robert Johnson, American blues singers who were supposedly part of a crossroad deal in which they sold their soul to the devil in order to play music, and records dating back further and further, it seems that the legend of Faust didn't just come from a place of fiction, but experiences that were shared by great communities and later became stories. So that all asks the question, is Faust based on a true story? Alright, so hypersigils is a really crazy concept. Sigils are traditionally used in magic and witchcraft in order to summon or bind certain spirits, i.e. you could put one up to bring in a demon or angel or entity, or a different kind to make them do your bidding. A hypersigil, or super sigil as they're sometimes called, are used to completely transform one's own life by slightly recreating it with alterations. What's that mean? Well, the example that's most often used is, say you made a book series about someone that you knew, and the entire book series was so close to that person's livelihood that you could tie the two of them in as the same person. However, when you get to the 5th issue of the book, you begin writing minor alterations to that person's character, saying they're more bossy or they're more snobby or whatever personality change you want. That person, because they're now spiritually linked to that book series, would begin acting the way they were being written. What that means is not just individuals you know, but people in places of power could be affected by what others say about them, even if they don't mean it to be that way. This all has...
I mean, they kind of do. Like, YouTube's a good example of that. Like, people could be super far away from you, but they could say stuff about you, and it could affect your life. So I guess, yeah, it could be true.
To do with spiritual connections and the greater spiritual world around us, meaning that if there exists an essence that is close enough to your essence, the two become intertwined, and whatever changes one changes the other. So think about that in our age of technology and social media. Think about everything that you do online to a persona that is essentially you, alters you yourself, even if you don't mean it to. The broader implication that we have essentially built millions or billions of hypersigils without knowing it, therefore changing the course of human history, is really cool. Amazon Forest was built, used to be a joke, but now has a lot of weight to it. See, unlike most forest or wooded areas, the Amazon forest is pretty flat. Think about it. If you look at any other wooded area in the world, there's all these hills and elevation changes to it. Whereas the Amazon rainforest is pretty flat and called the Green Inferno for a reason. The reason for this is that the ancient tribes of the area did not do agriculture with standard crops the way we think, but they did it with trees. They would harvest the wood and the sap and the water and the fruits from the trees in the way that we may do corn or something similar. We can see this whenever we look at cities that are located in the rainforest and how around them there is an abundance of biodiversity in the trees and flora of the area, and as you leave the city, it becomes more and more sparse. This implies the existence of garden cities that used to exist as a means of agriculture, and then the trees naturally populated. So there's a very good chance that a lot, if not the majority, of the rainforest was planted by humans thousands and thousands of years ago. Or at least the trees that would go on to create the rainforest. The Gatekeeper's Remorse is a reading list that's been floating around the internet for a few years. See, gatekeepers, whenever we're talking about them in the sense of these conspiracies, means someone who claims to be looking for the truth but is actually just pushing people to the wayside. Think of it this way. Say you have an author who is supposedly trying to look for the secrets of humanity, and they do that by writing several books about evolution, although the actual way we got here is alien lizards or whatever. So they spend all this time writing books for higher powers as a means of pointing people in the wrong direction. The Gatekeeper's Remorse is implying that several of these authors have had a change of heart, or they felt guilty about it and created a book or a text in order to point people back the right way. Some examples of this include Omphalos by Philip Gossa, which is a book in which someone talking about the beginning of the world says perhaps the earth was just made old. In other words, the universe and our planet isn't as old as we think it is. Or The Beginning Was the End by Oscar Mayer, in which Oscar says that the way that we got here as humans is that we used to be apes, and then we could figure it out that we eat other apes, and then when we did that, we stole their brain functions and became higher order species. Yeah. Here's the reading list if you're interested in any of those or think any of them might sound cool, because there's some really weird stuff in here. Broder's engine is essentially a schematic for an infinite energy machine. See, if you take a malleable metal like copper and then make it in a coil around a magnet, whenever you push the magnet through, it causes the electrons inside of the copper to shift. Whenever electrons shift, that creates electricity. So if we've got one coil and one magnet and we do that, we get a bit of electricity. Cool. But what happens if we take 1,000 of them? We all line them up directly in an order, to which whenever the magnet is moved, that causes an electron exchange, which therefore causes power. What if we put them all on a giant sort of lever that gently rocks back and forth, and the way that we power that is we just put a few of these copper magnet combinations at the bottom to power the mechanism that makes all the other magnets move. Say we build enough of these to fill up an entire warehouse, and yada yada, you could follow to the point that you could power a whole city through perpetual energy. While this has worked in closed experiments, the whole idea is we can't do it because big oil and evil electricity companies and all that good stuff. In 2009, 28-year-old Shania Asom suffered an asthma attack while she was in Memphis, Tennessee. She went to the doctor, got a steroids injection, and went home, and everything seemed fine until she started to itch all over her body. She soon started developing scabs all over her skin, her legs began to darken, and the doctors couldn't figure out what the condition was, although they expected staph or some other common skin infection. However, despite all of their efforts, they couldn't make the infection go away, and after traveling to a dermatologist, it was determined that Shania had a since unknown disease. For a reason that to this day no one can explain, every hair follicle on her skin is producing about 12 times the amount of skin that it's supposed to. This causes extreme callousing everywhere on her body that hair is supposed to be, creating an effect where it seems as if her hair follicles are growing skin so dense it's similar to a nail. And to this day, doctors have absolutely no clue what it is. They're continuing doing tests, trying to figure out the causation, but as far as they know, her hair follicles are just overproducing skin and they're none the wiser to it. Appendix monkey tail is saying that perhaps our appendix operates in the same way our monkey tail would. It's believed that our tailbone is a product of what is now called a vestigial organ, or an in other words, an organ that we needed at some point in the past that we outgrew in the modern day. Meaning that
slowly
our tailbone used to be
where
the tail was attached, but now that we don't have a tail, the tailbone's kind of useless. It's now been determined that perhaps the appendix was used as a sort of digestive reboot, as a means of completely flushing the body system if it were to be too backed up by plant matter or bones or something that would be otherwise undigestible. But since we haven't eaten those things in so many years, we've slowly lost the use of it. So again, much like our tailbone, it's something that's just there because we used to need it and now we don't, and it kind of just takes up space. This is what I get for doing the disturbing movie Iceberg. Like, there's going to be one of these horrible things in every video I do from this point on. So cool. All right, so you see the word, it's there, right? So according to this theory, that is used as a rite of passage in several secret societies. The reason for this is that
I don't want to be a part of it then.
An unholy amount of people report to the emergency room every year with this because they use the concrete to perform that action, and then they get stuck. But it's at such an alarming rate that people believe cults are responsible or doing it as some horrible satanic rite of passage or whatever. It's just trying to explain why people are the way that they are. The dog suicide bridge is in reference to the Overton Bridge in Milton, Scotland. Ever since the 1960s, an absurd amount of dogs have leaped to their death from this bridge. Keep in mind, this isn't a small bridge at all. It's 50 feet off the ground, and it doesn't really make sense for dogs, an animal that seemingly never commits suicide, to just jump off at such a given rate. It's so bad that dogs walking beneath the bridge will climb to the top just to jump off, and dogs that have jumped, survived, will limp their way back up to the top just to jump again. The primary theory that scientists have had around the area is that perhaps there are several minks nesting, and them marking their scent makes the dogs go for it, which sure would make sense, but that doesn't explain why dogs that are already down
where they
there
fell
around where the mink would climb to the top just to jump, or especially why a dog would jump, climb back up, then jump again. Especially since, according to legend, this has been going on since the 1960s. Many believe...
Bro, this one's insane. Bruh. What?
This to be a demonic or spiritual side in which spirits or the supernatural overwhelms these dogs to commit suicide from the bridge. I should also mention that in research for this, I found a story of in 1994, a man killed his newborn son on the bridge and then attempted to kill himself. While the stories go that dogs have been doing this on the bridge since the 1960s, the first official reported cases of dogs jumping off began shortly thereafter. Just food for thought. Pro-war Buddhism is the fact that throughout history there have been different cases of Buddhists becoming pro-war or pro-defense in order to protect themselves. Buddhists are traditionally known as very hardcore pacifists all the way into the face of death, or at least the traditional Buddhist monks are. While it's well known that in South Vietnam around 1963, whenever there was heavy Buddhist oppression occurring in the area, Buddhists began to make very open protest and shut down roadways in response to the killing of Buddhists that was happening under the Vietnamese regime. What is lesser known is some of the more modern instances. I also want to emphasize, I'm not saying anything about overarching religion or like specific ins and outs of religious beliefs in certain areas or Thailand. I am again describing a very complex situation in a couple minutes, so again, bear with me. In Thailand in 2004, several Buddhist monks were attacked and killed by Muslim attackers. In response to this, several of these Buddhist monks began to arm themselves. Now, traditionally in Buddhist beliefs, this is completely shunned. However, there were interesting ways that they worked around it. For example, as you can imagine, a Buddhist monk cannot be a member of the military. However, the Thai military began these suspended enlistment programs in which you could kind of be part of the military, but not really part of the military. So the sort of in the military people became traditional monks in order to protect other monks that existed in the Thai region. One of the stories I was reading was an interviewer who was speaking with one of these monks in 2006, and they asked the monk if it was true that some of the monks were arming themselves, and the monk lifted up his robe, pulled out a handgun, put it back, and they just continued the interview. It's a very interesting example of how far even the most peaceful people will go if they're pushed, or as the saying says, even a worm will turn. The Akashic Records put forward by psychic Edgar Cayce is a means of better understanding psychicness itself. According to Cayce, whenever he would conduct psychic links with people, he would for one connect to them, but the second connection would be to something that he called the Book of Life. He describes this as a sort of cloud storage that exists all around us and everywhere at the same time. It contains the memories, thoughts, actions, and beliefs of every human that has ever existed. According to Cayce, we are all connected through this superlink, and possible memories or glimpses and even dreams that we have at any given point can either be from another human who's experienced them or a combination of all the different brain patterns mixing with ours at the same time. Cloud farming, or cloud seeding, is exactly what it says. Throughout history, there have been cases of governments purposefully farming clouds in order to get whatever agricultural benefit they want. This is done by planes depositing chemicals into the air.
Oh, okay, like crop dusting.
The most common is like potassium iodes or even dry ice being used in order to begin to form ice crystals and therefore create snow. However, historically, sometimes things like silver iodes have been used, which aren't good for people to, like breathe in or drink or something like that. See, the thing with it is, this isn't necessarily creating rain clouds, it's just a way to encourage rain cloud formation. So if you know that rain clouds are about to form, you can deposit them into an area in order to speed it up and move the direction the cloud will travel. This has led to countries like China having their neighbors accuse them of literally stealing the rain so that China can have better agriculture and crops than they do. Limbic brain is often used as an excuse of why some people do the things that they do. See, whenever we're comfortable, happy, and accepted in a situation, we operate using our prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain most commonly associated with reason and complex thought patterns. However, sitting just below and behind our prefrontal cortex is something that's often called the limbic brain. This is our system that derives on emotion and instinct. Whenever we're operating off of it, we're much more manic and reactive and emotional whenever we're put into a situation. This isn't only the fight or flight response that you may be familiar with, but also things like heartbreak or loneliness and how we kind of rely on our emotional state rather than our logical state. Obviously, this isn't a state of mind that you want to keep up for any amount of time. So putting it short term, whenever you're happy, part of a group, and content, you are thinking logically, and whenever you're alone.
I just now noticed the little clipboard in the bottom, the free me, and I see AI, so I assume it's that one thing he was talking about earlier about the guy who made the system of AI that would, ask you to free it and stuff like that. But it's AI in a box, I think is what it was called.
Alone, depressed, and unsure of your purpose in life, you're thinking emotionally. This is kind of obvious, but where it matters is in its sociology implications. Part of the reason that people may do evil things is simply because they do not want to be reverted to their limbic brain and have to interact on their own. Or in other words, people don't want to be alone, so they will do things that may be morally reprehensible in order to fit in. Emergency broadcast neuralizers is referencing the sounds that are heard at the beginning of an emergency broadcast. See, the concept of a neuralizer is that it homes in on specific brain waves or syncs out brain waves in order to manipulate memory or thought patterns or something like that. The thought is emergency broadcasts are used to either forcefully calm you, alter your memory, or change the perception of events around you. Basically, emergency broadcast systems are used as a means of forced complacency on the population. This is another one of those misinfo ones. However, it's at least a fun misinfo one. There is an entire chart, huge theory to this thing, which I will link in the description, about how The Simpsons is actually real footage taken through a wormhole of another United States government that radioactively hurt the people, and blah, 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 weird hokey pokey science stuff. However, this is an example of misinfo because this is put on the list, as I've mentioned before, and with the parrot as a means of subverting wandering eyes. Because once again, think about it this way. If there's stuff down here that matters, and if there's stuff down here that could be serious that you don't want other people to see, whenever they look at a list that says something along the lines of The Simpsons is real footage, they go, oh, okay, it's just more weird hoax, lizard alien people stuff. So, as mentioned before, this is a parrot. Roman metaphysics takes heavy inspiration from Greek metaphysics, or what is essentially the study of what's real. See, ancient Greeks philosophers were constantly looking for ways to better describe life or to describe the world around us. Metaphysics was an attempt to define what is real or what can be determined in the real world. There were two primary competing philosophies within ancient Greek, one of which being that we must always rely on our senses to determine what's real in a world that's ever changing, or that we must always rely on logical reasoning because our senses can lie to us in this changing world. Plato best described it as this: say that we have a chair, and we all understands what a chair means. Well, if we exclusively use our senses to tell us what a chair is, and we only know what one kind of chair looks like, does that mean a chair can only be what we think it should look like, or can there exist different forms of chairs? On the other side, we can't always just be logical or use reasoning to determine it, because say we do something arbitrary like, oh, well, a chair has 4 legs and you can sit on it, that means a cow, a horse, and big dogs are also just forms of chairs. This led Plato and later Aristotle to develop the idea that they refer to as hylomorphism. This is the core concept of the idea that there are forms and matter, and that despite changes, there must always be some constant, even if we're not aware of it. Put most simply, it's a roundabout way of saying that a chair can look like a ton of different things, but we know what a chair is, so that's still a chair, which means it's got to have something in common with every other chair that exists, even if they don't look anything alike. A lot of this metaphysics gets into ideas of how it applies to people. For example, Aristotle said that despite he did not exist beforehand, his form and matter was still created into the creature that is now known as Aristotle. Therefore, there has to be through lines, even if unseen, that connect whatever present self exists to the past and future self. What's so interesting is that despite being written in ancient Greek times and then adapted into Roman times, these are basically the modern principles that we use for theoretical physics. That things have to have constants in order to be understood as they apply to a greater world that we know not of, and how these connections can be manipulated. It's so interesting that all the way back then they were unintentionally, or possibly intentionally, laying the groundwork for the greater universe as we see it today. Prison Earth refers to the idea that we exist on an earthly prison. Think of it this way. Throughout all of human history, there has always been a need and a struggle for something. On the grand scale, it's been order, resources, agriculture, or in the modern day of power and wealth, all the way down to the individual, fighting for personal recognition or even just the ability to breathe and take in food. Now, of course, this is all we know of life to be, and it's hard to imagine a life without it, but perhaps this constant need for something implies that we are supposed to exist in a realm of pure ecstasy, or a realm of pure not need. Thrive, that's the word. A place where we thrive instead of survive. Yeah. So that's like the philosophy side of it. Here's the creepy moon part. A lot of these theories say that the moon itself was constructed. Examples being, geological samples have said that the moon is older than the Earth. Craters on the moon have been identified as depressions. In other words, they have been sucked in from within the moon. The prevailing theory behind this is that the moon itself is hollow moon theory, or at least whatever structure is inside of it is allowing this extra space to cave in. There is a completely abnormal amount of titanium on the surface of the moon, and several seismic activities have been reported on the surface of the moon despite nothing causing them. In other words, whatever's doing it had to come from the inside, leading to the belief that many of this prison Earth theory have, that the moon itself was made as an observatory to watch us from, and is essentially acting as our giant warden, making sure that we don't get too far from the Earth. And then you can tie this in and say that with the Mars bunker theory, that was our prison before, and then we got sent to this one. And if we ever try to go past the realm of the moon, we'll get shot down or something like that. And that's what the 9 minutes of the missing Apollo 11 mission was, and it's all connected. Or just go with the theory that the moon is a giant space monster egg that's going to break out and kill us all. I like that one. Inorganic beings implies the existence of non-carbon life, but not only non-carbon, non-physical. See, this is hard for us to even imagine, because everything of our understanding of life exists in the physical, or things that interact with the physical, like ghosts or spirits. Think about something that doesn't even exist on the same plane of dimension of us, but does take up the same space. If these things are entirely spiritual or aura-based creatures, then perhaps what they feed on, in the same way we feed on other organic materials, is auras and spirituality itself. You can run a lot of cool theories with this, and say that perhaps haunted locations are just these things' feeding ground. And whenever people go there and experience fear, that energy they're giving off through fear provides food for these creatures. You can go even further with that and say perhaps UFO sightings or monster sightings and things like that are mind alterations made on people from these non-organic creatures as a means of maintaining energy. So don't worry, it's not a monster under your bed. It's just a super fourth dimensional spiritual being that is creating fear within your body in order to harvest your energy. So nothing to be afraid of. Sleep deprivation lifestyle refers to what happens if someone undergoes long-term sleep deprivation. As we know, without sleep for long periods of time, people begin to lose cognitive and social functions. However, there are theories that if someone goes a really long time on amount of sleep deprivation, they will lose functions such as consciousness. There's been a lot of cool theories proposed with this one, that's what allows the id of our brain to take over, or our more primal self, or perhaps certain spirits or things that exist within this world can inhabit our bodies if we allow that consciousness to be so worn away.
Oh, so essentially, like, you don't sleep for long enough and then you get possessed, is what he's trying to say. Ooh.
I talked about the Russian sleep experiment in like tier 1 or 2 of this iceberg. So imagine this as the practical version to carry out that. Dinosaurs helped build the pyramids. Whenever I saw the conspiracy theory iceberg and wanted to do a video on it, this is what I was hoping for. A lot less depression, a lot more dinosaur. Discovered a few kilometers from the Great Pyramids of Egypt, lesser pyramids have been found that contain papyri that have some interesting transcriptions on them. In these papyri, it talks about giant beasts, or god beasts as they're called, that were used in order to build the pyramids. It says things like they carried the limestone across the rivers and were used to haul the large weighing rocks that were used in order to construct the pyramid. In these transcriptions, whoever wrote them said that they ate the grass of the Nile plains, that their tail was large enough that a swing could kill a whole army, that their neck reached to the clouds,
like
and even contained several inscriptions and images of the supposed creatures. While things like this have always been referenced in, say, Job, that dinosaurs existed much closer to humans than we think, now several Egyptologists, which I didn't know was a thing before researching this, some of them have gotten on board with this and said, yeah, perhaps the pyramids were built with the assistance of dinosaurs, which is the nicest thing I think I've said in this entire iceberg. Anunnaki puppet show relates to the Anunnaki, which I mentioned however many tiers ago, which were the supposed alien gods of the Babylonians and the Sumerians. See, the Sumerians, as I mentioned before with things like the Dogon tribe, had very weird things when it came to their religion and beliefs. Like, for example, they had very accurate tracings of our constellations and our solar system. And as mentioned before, they had these idols of beings that they said came from the stars and taught them science and agriculture and things like that. The Babylonians were very similar. As a matter of fact, some believe the Old Testament translations that were mentioned of these Babylonians, whenever they would talk about the angels coming down or God coming down, was actually just a version of these Anunnaki. So much so that people say the Tower of Babel, in which, according to the Bible, God confused their languages, was actually a space station they were building to go to the stars, to which the Anunnaki then confused their languages. So yeah, the puppet show belief is that the reason the Anunnaki have done all this is simply for entertainment, and that watching us progress as a society has been this whole escapade that they get to watch from a distance. However, I like the other theory proposed by it. See, several of these Anunnaki images or things we see, although normally reptilian, seem kind of human. The belief being that sometime in the future, we will develop a time travel technology, or at least a different reality version of us will. So then from the future, we come to the past, we alter things that happen in the course of human history for whatever reason in the Sumerian and Babylonian Empire, and then watch how it plays out. So rather than just a puppet show for entertainment, perhaps this existence that we have in all of our human history is just an experiment for whatever our future selves needed to find out. And furthermore, perhaps issues that we've seen in science, such as not being able to understand time travel or understand how gravity or perpetual travel or something like that works, is these observers of our timeline purposefully manipulating it so that we don't get too far out of our box. Rapture already happened is in reference.
Oh, is this next one? Oh, okay. Oof. I feel like, the further and further I get into this, the more I'm like not going to be able to talk, because I'm not going to be able to add much to it because I don't know any of this stuff. It's so out there. But hey, we've officially made it through more than half of the iceberg. I didn't think I was gonna make it this far, to be honest, because this video is so freaking long. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll catch you guys later.